Hi, everybody. I'm Christine Dolan. I'm the author of Urban Legends, and today I am joined by one of the co-authors of Urban Legends, Jeff Cleghorn. The book consists of COVID and trans, the pseudoscience, and it's a distillation of medical trafficking, because for COVID, you were forced, lied to, defrauded, and coerced to get your shots. And there's an underlying fraud involved for COVID, but there's also one involving trans. And Jeff and I met a couple years ago, and I asked him to contribute to the book because he has a different perspective. Jeff is a lawyer. He is a vet. He has been a gay activist for many years. And when I met Jeff a couple of years ago, he explained to me the significance of understanding. I'm straight, so I didn't understand the activism or the history, and Jeff was explaining it to me, and he is against targeting kids for the pseudoscience of transgenderism. So Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Christine.
So Jeff, tell the audience what you told me, because I found it absolutely fascinating, because there is a history here of the LGB, and then you've got the queer, emphasis. And explain that to the audience, because I think it's important for everybody to understand what happened here within this community and how we got here during COVID or before COVID, but there was such an increase in pushing transgenderism on children.
Well, and that's the connecting point that got you, that it caused my path to cross with you. I had begun testifying before various state legislatures around the country about different pieces of legislation they were considering that impacted children, in particular what they call quote unquote trans children. And I had been a gay rights activist beginning in 1993, so I go back a long while. But I had never heard of such a thing as so-called trans children. And much of everything else they are talking about now in the activist world about quote-unquote transgender, I had never heard of most of that either, because it wasn't part of the conversation in the 1990s. It wasn't part of the conversation in the 2000s. This notion of a transgender child only became something that activists started talking about within the last 10 to 15 years or something like that. So I viewed it with great suspicion from the start, and you and I connected. Transgenderism is an ideology. The ideology is that these people believe that you can change your sex. They believe that a man can become a woman somehow. They believe that a woman can become a man somehow. They believe, if I may speak bluntly, that a woman can have a penis or that a man can breastfeed a baby. These are part of the transgender belief system. And my sincerely held opinion is it's all ridiculous. And so you invited me to explain this from my perspective as a old school gay rights activist for parts of the last 4 decades. And to write a chapter for your book, Urban Legends, which I did. The chapter title is Transgender 101, The Fraud Seducing America's Children. And in that chapter, I try to explain a complicated topic in a relatively short amount of space. And as I say in the chapter, transgender is irrational, is illogical, is contradictory. It doesn't make sense. And to the extent that people who are being bombarded with it now through mainstream media, through Netflix and through Nickelodeon and through Disney and all these other venues and vehicles, through children's books and public schools and libraries that are literally and specifically targeting children about the so-called LGBTQ+ and about queer and about transgender. This is all new stuff that just began within the last 10, 15 years. None of this was happening back in the 1990s. We were trying to get what we considered to be gay rights, just the rights as, men and women who are same-sex attracted for whatever reason, just to live our lives with dignity and to be, to assimilate within the community and be good American citizens and to love our families and work hard, play by the rules, pay our taxes, As you mentioned, I'm an Army veteran and very proud of that. I live in the Deep South in the state of Georgia, sixth generation Georgia, and I take loyalty to country and whatnot very seriously. And the activists that I was involved with back in that day were like-minded, just good and decent men and women who were just trying to, we believed, change America for the better. But after the successes of the gay rights movement, then things went off the rails. Basically, everything on the gay rights movement drop-down menu was accomplished, and rather quickly, surprisingly so. But thereafter, the organizations that we as gay men and lesbian women had built, had funded, had created, those organizations were thereafter hijacked by this extremist line of queer thinking that's causing so much turmoil today, and that is literally and specifically targeting children, trying to brainwash children, proselytize to children. And as I say in the book chapter for Urban Legends, trying to seduce and groom children into believing in the make-believe, believing in fake imaginary things, that they can be born in the wrong body, that they can change their sex, and that if they, if a 13-year-old girl amputates her breast, or if a 16-year-old boy is castrated, that somehow they will be happy and their lives will be better. It's all complete nonsense. And so the chapter that I've written for your book, Transgender 101, is hopefully an effort to explain that to a reader who otherwise probably is scratching their head trying to make sense of something that really is not sensible.
So let's talk about the difference here, because when the same-sex marriage decision came down in 2015, you had explained to me where your generation just wanted to get their rights, protect from worker discrimination, military discrimination, same-sex marriage. You guys basically packed up your bags and went home, but you had left in place the Human Rights Campaign, which was a big organization, but you guys were paying out of your pocket. But all of a sudden, it became this monstrosity for this new ideology. And then we had a business. All of a sudden, we had clinics, hospitals, private clinics and hospitals adapt these quote-unquote medical ideology treatments. When did you wake up and say, hey, this is wrong?
Well, I began asking questions about 10 or so years ago. I have known and worked with many transgender people before. As a lawyer, I represented many transgender people in various legal actions to change their name, or even in child custody disputes between them and their spouses or their ex-spouses. And I had a close, past tense, a close transgender friend who was a prominent leader in the national transgender movement. So me and this former friend had several very lengthy conversations over the telephone where I asked questions trying to make sense of it. And the more questions I asked, the more confusing it became. There were always a handful of people who called themselves transgender. These are men with what is a mental illness, a mental disorder. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-5, diagnosed their mental condition as gender dysphoria. And the DSM-5 also diagnoses a mental illness called transvestic disorder. So these men who imitate women, who dress as women, who use female names and female pronouns and want to use the women's restroom and want to be in female sports. And in fact, just today, I read that the American Daughters of the American Revolution are now admitting for membership male to female identified transgender men. Men, in other words, can now be a member of DAR as we celebrate our great nation's 250th anniversary. That one was a shocker. So these men have this mental disorder condition, and I have known a fair number, and by and large, those who I've known have just been ordinary people trying to live their lives the best they can with this extraordinary condition that they have, but they weren't trying to proselytize. They weren't trying to compel and force all of society and all of government and all of the rest of us to acquiesce to their various ideological beliefs and lifestyle choices. They just wanted to get along, live their lives in peace. Fair enough. I'm live and let live. What an adult wants to do with their life, God bless them. But they were targeting children. And as I asked more questions about why are you going after the children? Why are you now saying there can be trans children? No one ever said that in the 1990s. No one ever talked about pronouns in the 1990s. No one.
Mhm.
This is all stuff that they've literally just made up in recent years. And this is part of the large institutions that, they needed something to do. So groups like the Human Rights Campaign. I have also served on the board of directors of Georgia Equality here in my home state. I've served on the board of directors of Lambda Legal, which is a national gay legal impact group for lawyers similar to the ACLU. They were looking for new missions. And so they glommed on to this notion of creating what they call a transgender child, which is basically a little boy or a little girl or a teenage boy or a teenage girl who are gender nonconforming, sex nonconforming. Maybe it's the sissy little boy who likes to play with dolls and doesn't like sports, or maybe it's the tom girl who likes to hang out with her dad and play in the dirt and doesn't like wearing dresses. These have always existed. It's just a normal, ordinary variation of human development. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing bad with it. But now, all of a sudden, for the first time in human history, we are told that these children are sick, that they need to be fixed, they need to be medicalized, they need to have their puberty blocked, they need to be put on opposite sex hormones. These young boys or pubescent teenage boys should be given estrogen, or teenage girls should be given the male sex hormone testosterone, and that they should have surgeries. And this was basically driven by ideology, by queer theory, by this notion that whatever is normal is bad and needs to be deconstructed, especially as it relates to human sexuality and to human biological sex, male and female. They want to change all of that for reasons that make no sense. It's irrational. It's illogical. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it was also a lust on the part of these organizations. Instead of just shutting down and saying mission accomplished, let's go home and enjoy our lives with dignity, they wanted to keep doing something. So they invented these causes. And then, and this is where this segues so nicely with the COVID vaccine issue, is the medical industry found out that they can make a lot of money off of this. So you have greedy and corrupt psychiatrists and psychologists and plastic surgeons who have jumped onto this bandwagon. Hospitals opened up so-called gender clinics all over the country. 15 years ago, there were maybe a couple of gender clinics in the whole country, and that exploded to hundreds of gender clinics all over, including 50 or 60 of them that were specifically called pediatric gender clinics. Again, these are for-profit medical ventures that were created because they made a lot of money. And after Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act was passed during Obama's administration. The Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, has language in it that compelled medical practitioners in hospitals who are involved in getting Medicare reimbursements, et cetera, from they called it not discriminating on the basis of what they call gender identity. And gender identity are these fake words they make up that basically means the transgender ideology, that people can change their sex, that children can be born in the wrong body, and that if you basically poison their bodies with these puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and then do these mutilating surgical interventions, that it'll somehow fix these kids and somehow make their lives happier and better. And the evidence, when you look at the hard evidence, as I discussed in the chapter in the Urban Legend book, the evidence shows just the exact opposite, that doing these things causes literal and direct harm to people.
Let's talk about the fraud behind this, because I think it's important for people to understand. And you introduced me to Jamie Reed, who's a whistleblower who worked at a St. Louis clinic, and also WPATH out of the UK. And it's important for people to understand this, what we call the pseudoscience. But the fact is, people lied. People lied.
Yes.
So let's introduce WPAT, because that was an entity that was set up to set up the rules of the game for
Yeah.
medical transgenderism. And then tell us the story about that, because you write about that in the book.
Yes. WPATH stands for the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH. And it is a worldwide organization that's basically a transgender activist organization. It masquerades as a medical association, but it is not. It never has been. Yes, it has doctors and it has psychiatrists, but mostly it has activists. And the doctors and other medical people involved in WPATH are activists first and doctors second. All of them involved in WPATH are making money off of transgendering their patients.
So they have vested interests the same way that the people that were connected to the COVID fraud had vested interest.
Exactly. And in fact, within the past couple of weeks, the Federal Trade Commission, along with 4 states, Texas, Alabama, Alaska, and 1 other state, and the Federal Trade Commission had filed a consumer fraud lawsuit against WPATH, which is a really a historic and gigantic step for the federal government to take, alleging in its lawsuit against WPATH that WPATH is a fraudulent organization that has created this fake medical paradigm that misleads parents and other medical providers around the country and gives them a license, if you will, to move forward and to engage in these medical practices for profit that makes the practitioner a lot of money, but that there's no proven benefit that it helps the patient. There have been over a dozen systemic reviews of medical evidence conducted over a period of years in various different countries, over a dozen, to include most recently in the United States a couple of years ago, a year or so ago, I should say, under President Trump. HHS, Department of Health and Human Services, under Secretary Robert Kennedy, conducted a systemic review of the medical evidence of pediatric gender medicine, of all the literature, all the research, all of the data that exists anywhere, and review all of the evidence and make an assessment of whether it is legitimate, whether it's credible, whether it's works. And the HHS review that was conducted a year or so ago, as I discuss in the book, found very decisively that it is not credible, and that's consistent with every other review of the medical evidence that's been conducted in the United Kingdom and in Norway and in Sweden and in several other European countries. They've all done the same thing, and they've all concluded similarly that the medical base for doing this to children is weak. It's shallow, it's flimsy. There's no long-term evidence whatsoever that this improves children's lives, either physically or psychologically. There is substantial and significant amount of evidence that if you do this to people, adults or children, that it greatly and tremendously increases their risk of suicide. One study found a 19 times increase in suicide for people who've fully transitioned, quote unquote. That includes having the bottom surgeries where they mutilate their genitals surgically and create a neo-fake vagina or
And let's talk about that, because the truth of the matter is that some of the people that actually push this as a business, okay, and as an ideology for profit, some of these men have fetishes for women's boobs, but many of them don't have the lower operation because they're smart enough to know that if they did, the risk of not having an orgasm may disappear. I mean, why is that message not getting out there to the public?
Well, it's the gay rights movement was successful to the point where we had the left-leaning mainstream media on our side all along.
Mm-hmm.
And that left-leaning mainstream media to this very day, from CNN to the New York Times, and all the rest of them, very affirmatively push all of this as though it's settled science, as though there's no debate, all of which is false, all of which is a lie. It's not settled at all, and there's a tremendous debate happening. And yes,
Why do you think the legacy media is doing that?
well, there is institutional capture. Most of the journalists.
But why would the legacy media want to be in favor of child mutilation?
Well, they don't view it as that. I think they're willfully ignorant. I don't think many of them have any idea what they're talking about. There have been a handful of stories over the last year or two in the New York Times, for example, that were actually surprisingly good and stepped outside of the talking points that you could be born in the wrong body, which of course you cannot, that you can change your sex, which of course you cannot. Nobody's ever gotten a Nobel Prize. No doctor has ever gotten a Nobel Prize for changing somebody's sex or for identifying this mysterious gender identity, because no such thing exists. But you mentioned men who have these bottom surgeries where they surgically mutilate their genitalia to create an image. Basically, it's a Frankenstein type surgery, to be blunt. Right. It's no other. There's no kind way of describing it. And the men who have it, by and large, have lifetime problems as a result of it, but very few of them actually have it. The vast majority of so-called transgender women still have their male parts down there. Why? For sexual gratification. I mentioned there are two primary types of mental illness that this falls into: the gender dysphoria mental illness, and the second part is the transvestic disorder mental illness.
Explain the difference between those two. It's important for people to understand that.
Yes, it is very important, because only a tiny, very small section of humanity has gender dysphoria. The likelihood of anybody ever meeting a quote-unquote transgender person in their lifetime is slim to none, based solely on someone with gender dysphoria. A child who is born and who just, from the earliest ages, just says, I want to be a girl, I want to be a girl. Once they grow up, and puberty tends to resolve that. There are multiple studies showing that gender nonconforming children like that, just leave them alone, that when they get through puberty, that puberty actually cures the dysphoria, literally. But that's one type of the transgender. The second type, which is actually significantly larger population, are the transvestic disorder. And these are overwhelmingly heterosexual males with a fetish. They become sexually aroused at the thought of being a woman, of wearing a dress, wearing makeup, earbobs, a wig, having a female name. These are all things they do because it makes them sexually aroused. They pretend to be a woman because it makes them horny, if I may be blunt. And that is literally the reality for the vast majority of so-called transgender women. And that's why these men are so anxious to have access to female-only spaces like locker rooms and female changing rooms and things like this, and because it gives them sexual arousal.
So do you take a look at this with your history and life experiences, Jeff, in that this is predatory in terms of this group of people who have this ideology that want to prey on somebody else's kids, even to the point where if parents do not go along with the conforming, they are then criticized as committing child abuse just because they're not going along with it? I mean, because I take a look at this as who has the right to prey upon somebody else's kids?
Yeah, it is predatory, and I discuss that in some detail in the chapter in the book. There are now a large number of children's books about the LGBTQ plus. The Q stands for queer. Queer means anything goes sexually. The plus stands for who knows. There's no end to it. And I talk in the book very bluntly about pedophilia and the problems with pedophilia within this population in particular. And I give specific examples, recent examples of several instances of pedophilic drag queens, pedophilic transgenders, pedophilic LGBTQ pluses.
Let's talk about that, because I think that what we've seen now, and this is just in recent years, this was not there 15 years ago, is the drag queen reading hours for kindergartners. Now, you've educated me. The drag queens were pretty much inside the gay male clubs, but now all of a sudden they're targeting kids. What's the purpose of that?
Well, there were no drag queens reading to children in the 90s or 2000s, that's for sure. And now all of a sudden, and this is largely happening in Democrat-controlled jurisdictions, it is political. The Democrat Party has gotten on board with this hook, line, and sinker. In many Democrat-controlled states like California and Illinois and New Jersey, the legislatures are passing laws that will take away custody of children if their parents do not affirm, they call it, quote unquote, affirm the child is transgender. Many Democrat states allow school districts to talk to children about these things without the parents' knowledge or consent.
Or to keep secrets from mommy and daddy. To me, that's a red flag, because that's what rapists tell kids, predators, sex predators, when they go to kids. This is our secret. You know, so I mean, when I heard that was like head snapping to me.
And of course, this isn't everybody, and nobody's saying it's everybody, but it happens, and it happens more than a little bit. And the mainstream media rarely discusses these incidents when they happen. And for some reason, of course, the transgender activist organizations, like the Human Rights Campaign and Lambda Legal, they're not going to talk about it. They don't want us to know about it. I mean, these organizations are making a tremendous amount of money. They have large staffs that are paid lavish salaries. The executive directors of these groups make hundreds of thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. You know, it's in their financial interest to keep pushing this and profiteering off of it. And there is a child safeguarding issue that this population and this so-called movement purposefully and literally ignores. They refuse to take child safeguarding seriously. And those of us who raise our hands and say, hey, you know, this don't look right, this don't smell right, then they attack us, they vilify and insult us, they cancel us. You know, I'm retired, so I can't be canceled at this point. But, you know, people are hesitant to speak out because they don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to suffer social repercussions or financial repercussions from their friend groups, especially if they live in blue states or even in large urban areas like Atlanta here in Georgia, where I live. You know, Atlanta's pretty captured with this stuff as well. There aren't a lot of people up there talking about it.
Let's talk about Jamie Reed. You introduced me to Jamie Reed. Jamie Reed is someone who has been out there. So let's tell the audience about Jamie Reed, because her affidavit is also in the chapter that you've written.
Yeah, Jamie Reed was the first public pediatric gender clinic whistleblower in the United States. As you mentioned, she worked at a pediatric gender clinic in St. Louis, Missouri, as part of University of Missouri. And
I think it was Washington University, actually.
Washington University, yes, thank you, in St. Louis. And so Jamie's has described herself in the past as being to the left of Bernie Sanders politically. She's a lesbian. She's a mother of 5 boys, 5 children, 3 of whom she adopted through foster care. She used to work with HIV positive patients previously in her career. So she's a brilliant, smart woman who's very passionate about helping people and helping children and helping disadvantaged, especially. So she wanted to get involved and help these transgender children. So she began working at this clinic. And after a few years of working there, she realized that what was happening was bad and wrong, that the clinic was literally actually harming children and hurting children. The clinic was manipulating parents, telling the parents that if they did not consent to allowing their children to, quote unquote, transition to be the opposite sex, which is an impossible thing to do, obviously. But if the parents did not consent and the child was going to commit suicide, This is a lie, and I talk about it in the book. One of the many lies that this movement say. They say that if you don't do what we want to have happen, that people are going to kill themselves, people are going to hurt themselves. This is all just propaganda. It's far left, fringe left, dishonest, unethical propaganda. They're pushing for a host of reasons, but in large part to make money, to profiteer, and manipulating parents, lying to parents, and more horribly hurting children along that process. Anyhow, Jamie Reed raised her hand and said this isn't right, and she's since become one of the national, if not the national voice on this issue in the United States. She's testified in dozens of states before their state legislatures, as well as in courtrooms around the country in various pieces of litigation.
And overseas.
That are happening. Jamie has also founded a new gay rights organization called the LGBT Courage Coalition, which is the LGBT Courage Coalition is an organization that's focused exclusively on educating people about this and protecting children, especially sex nonconforming children. If you have, these effeminate little boys or teenagers, the data and the HHS evidence review that I mentioned earlier talks about this as well. The data shows that overwhelmingly, those kids most probably are going to grow up to be gay. They probably are. So this whole effort to medicalize these children is basically a form of horrible conversion therapy, trying to change them from a same-sex attracted person probably into a
mutilated body.
Sex.
A mutilated body. Yeah. And it's horrifying. All right. So we want to talk about, I want to end this, but end it on the fact that we both know that probably, we're going to get attacked. Dr. Sheila Fury added to this section of the book she is a psychiatrist, and she actually is an expert witness in human trafficking cases as well as child abuse cases. And we'll do an interview with Sheila later as well. But we know that we're going to be attacked. Okay, so I'm not afraid of these people because I think it's predatory behavior. I think it's got a lot of politics underneath this. I mean, Obama was the first president of the United States that ever used the word transgender in the State of the Union in 2000, and I think it was 2015. The Gays Against Groomers have been attacked for standing up and speaking out. Jamie has been attacked. But at the same time, when you're targeting kids, there's no reason to sit on the bench as far as I'm concerned, whether you're a journalist like me who's covered trafficking, sex and labor, organ trafficking, all over the world. And I want to commend you for stepping forward and for contributing to the book, because I think it's as I said to you very early on when I asked you to do this, it was important for you to tell your story from your perspective, because I haven't lived that activism and I wouldn't know it. And I think it's a hell of a contribution to the book. And I just want to acknowledge and thank you for that, Jeff. I think it's really important that people understand, because I think that one of the first conversations we ever had, you were telling me about the assimilation as opposed to what it's now morphed into of targeting other people's kids.
Yeah. And that's a modus operandi of this fringe left activist movement. They attack people who disagree with them, and they do it to shut us up. Because if they can shut us up, then the mainstream media continues to distort their propaganda, to spew their propaganda, I should say. And politicians don't know any better, because no one like Jamie Reed and others are showing up to tell them the difference. So, if they choose to attack because of this book, then have at it. We're ready to.
We're ready for them. We're ready for them. And I want to acknowledge it, because your contribution has been extraordinary in terms of how much you've shared in the history, because I think it's really important, and your analysis is extraordinary.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to contribute to Urban Legends, and I hope that the reader will find value in the Transgender 101 section in understanding what again, I'm telling them up front. And as I talk about in detail in the chapter, is irrational, illogical. It doesn't make sense. You just got to, don't beat yourself up over, well, I just don't understand it. There must be something I don't understand. Maybe there's people who understand this more than I, and, I'll just go along with what they say. No, no, no. If you don't understand it, then you are exactly where I am and exactly where you should be, because it's not something that can be rationalized away, and you shouldn't shut up. You need to stand up, speak out. We're talking about protecting children.
Jeff Cleghorn, again, thank you for contributing to Urban Legends. And I can't wait for people to read the section of the book that you've contributed to. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine.